All right, I think we can start the session. So welcome to the next session that we have today, and this is going to be on innovative business models. We have here international experts from India, Germany, Sweden to give us an overview of business models, innovations on energy markets, focusing on energy transition in cities, and among others on the transition in electrical vehicles. I'm going to briefly introduce the panel chair to you, but before that, one instruction to the audience. If you are here and would like to ask questions to the moderator or to the speakers, would like to leave a couple of comments, please leave them in the chat option throughout the session. We will also have some time in the end to take up some questions, and some questions will be integrated even during the discussions. So with that, I'm going to introduce the session chair to you. It is Mr. Hannes Hobby, who's a research associate at the Chair of Business Administration, especially Energy Economics at the Technical University of Dresden. His research focuses on techno-economic relationships existing in adaptive electricity markets and operation of power grids. He holds a diploma in energy engineering and management from the Leibniz Universität Hannover and Lund University, Sweden. Since 2012, he has worked as a researcher at the Chair of Energy Economics, TU Dresden, and otherwise has gained broad academic and teaching experience in several European, Middle Eastern, as well as Southeast Asian countries. Hannes, I hand it over to you for the further discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ajishu, for the kind introduction. Warm welcome to everyone here, to the panelists, also to the audience. So we are going to speak about innovative business models. I was here for quite a while in India 2 days on a workshop that deals with the transition of the transportation system. My role as an economist always wants to emphasize that transforming transportation systems is not only a technological transition, but also needs reorganizing markets, right? And that is what we are here and try to speak a little about. We get an international panel here consisting of researchers from India, Germany, but also Sweden. I'm quite excited to introduce Dr. Rohit Bakar. To you, he's associate professor at the Department of Electrical Engineering at Malabar National Institute of Technology, Jaipur. He works in the field of power system management, leads the group. His background is electrical engineering, but he is also addressing questions related to electricity markets. So he has a more systemic view on the system. I'm also introducing Mr. Philip Kienscherf. He is a senior research consultant at the EWI Institute. It's like an energy economics group connected with the University of Cologne. And his field of work lies in decentralization and digitalization of energy systems. And then we got Dr. Matthias Wieberg here. He works at the Digital Futures faculty at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden as a postdoc researcher, and his background is computer science and business economics. So it's quite international group of panelists that we do have here, but also, let's say, diverse with respect to their specific research fields. So before we start with the discussion, I'd like to invite you to give a small pitch about the situation in your countries. Maybe, Rohit, you can start and give us a little insight about challenges you do see in integrating large shares of electric vehicles in your country's electricity and market system.
Thanks, Hans. Thanks for the introduction. In fact, it's quite international panel, and I'd like to share a few quick slides for the benefit of all. Just to highlight the opportunities that exist in India. India is one of the largest energy consuming country, and also we have one of the largest RE penetration in the country, which is as high as 175 gigawatts, as on date, which fairly constitutes somewhere around 40% plus of the overall capacity that exists in the country. In that also, there is a significant solar penetration, which is increasing at a very fast rate. Solar penetration of about 12.5% of the overall capacity. So that brings in a lot of opportunity of green power, especially during the daytime when sun is high, and also creating opportunities for EV users to use their electric vehicle and charge their electric vehicles during that time. Presently, if you just have a glimpse of what is the state of affairs, different states have, India has got a dual governance mechanism in which there is central government and state governments. Different state governments, as you see, have set up their own policy targets of how much penetration of EV charging stations that they're looking for. The present state of affairs of the EV charging stations that you can see somewhere around 1600 to 1800 charging stations as on date. The growth has been significant over a period of time over the last couple of years. So in some of the larger cities, which are large urban population, you can see significant growth happening over the last few years, specifically despite the COVID challenges, there has been significant growth in this segment. Also, there are a large number of investors bringing in mobility solutions. So if you see some of the big names, Ola and these other entities like BlaBlaCar, S-Ride, they are giving a variety of options for car sharing, for ride hailing, to micromobility solutions, as well as there are several of those which are providing EV charging infrastructure, investing significantly into that segment, charging station operators. However, developing this as a service, energy as a service, has been slightly slower because of regulatory challenges. There is also a lack of policy guidelines as how the electricity sector as a whole would grow. So considering those challenges, there has been a bit of lack of infrastructure on the EV charging station side and the range anxieties issues. And apart from that, the location of those charging stations is still a challenge in the urban area. Finding appropriate land for those is a challenge which the government and the private entrepreneurs, they are trying to fix it. But I think looking at the size of the economy, there are a lot many things that are likely to happen, and we'd be happy to have an understanding of what other countries are doing and how we can shape it up. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, for the very illustrative overview on the current system in India. Matthias, maybe you can switch on, like we can switch to you and you share your thoughts about the current challenges that you do see you have in Sweden.
Thank you. I'm happy to do that. I will share my screen with you here in order to show some slides. There you go. Now you should be able to see a first slide. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. Sweden, a small country up north in Europe, with approximately as many inhabitants as Delhi as a city. So we are 10 million people trying to do the switch to electrical and chargeable vehicles. And what is the state in Sweden right now? I looked at some stats from February 2023, and what we can see now is that we are having approximately 9% of the personal car fleet that is electrified, and electrified is both hybrid and only battery electric vehicles. So I would say that it's electrified, but like 50% is still hybrid. So a part of this electrification is happening with fossil fuel hybrid cars, right? The growth in the electrical vehicles is tremendous. The growth the last 12 months has been 44%. So what we foresee is that we quite quickly, people are talking about 5 to 10 years, we'll have a fleet that is up to 60 or 70% consisting out of chargeable vehicles. And when we talk about chargeable vehicles, we can see growth both in the personal cars as well as the electrical, as buses and other types of vehicles. So this is happening all over the different kind of vehicles. What we also have seen is a tremendous growth in charging possibilities, where the public chargers are today. We are looking at roughly 3,000 of them. And when I say public, it's not public, it's public as in accessible by the public, but very many of those are owned by the different car brands or other companies that are providing a charging possibility for people with electrical vehicles. There is also quite many charging possibilities that are connected to people's own properties. So people living in villas, for instance, they most often have the possibility to, for a very small amount of money, install a charger where they can charge their car that is parked at their parking lot. So if that was the state of the electrical vehicles in Sweden, what is the state of energy in Sweden? Well, Sweden is a net exporting country when it comes to electricity, so we are producing more than we are consuming. But we are also connected to the energy market, the European energy market, which means that even though we are having more electricity and we are producing more electricity than we need, it has been the price of electricity has been heavily affected by the reopening after COVID-19 and of course the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has led to quite severe problems when it comes to the pricing of energy. I looked into 2 months that is differed by 2 years in time, December 2020 and December 2022, and from there we can see that the price of a kilowatt hour has increased by 1,333%. So the price for electricity in Sweden is quite high when at this point in time. But the increase in electrical vehicles is huge, and even though we can see a huge increase, it's still a very small part of the total energy. I think it's around 1% that is used to charge those electrical vehicles. And if we would go over the full electrical fleet, that will mean roughly 10% of the produced energy, and roughly 10% is approximately the same figure as we are exporting. So producing energy nationally for the electrical cars will not be a problem. What could be a problem, of course, is if we are trying to fast charge cars, then we will have an unbalanced grid, and that will incur a lot of problems. So future key issues that are discussed in Sweden today is of course balancing the grid capacity, the interconnection of different new grid technologies, where a lot of actors are stakeholders are introducing new technology, but they are often doing it for their solution, and there's a lack of common protocols where things can talk to each other and we can share capacity there. Another issue that is discussed is the infrastructure for curbside park charging. 49% of the Swedish households are in apartment buildings where there is no opportunity for you to connect your car to your own some electrical grid, which means that you have to go via the companies, and this makes it even more expensive. And it's also hard to redesign the road and make sure that there is a charger for every car that is curbside parked. So that's a problem that we are looking at how to solve that. And of course, the data sharing between different services, as well as finding some relevant business models, are some future key issues that we see in the market in Sweden. I think that was my introduction to the state of Sweden.
Great, thanks for your Swedish perspective. Philip, how is the situation in Germany?
So I hope that you can see my screen. I think it's actually fairly similar to the situation in Sweden, given that we both are subject to European legislation in that regard. So Germany, just as well as Sweden and obviously other parts of the world, are trying to abate carbon emissions. And the transportation sector at large is a large contributor to CO2 emissions as they are today. So currently, most of the vehicles that are in place, also in Germany, still run via gasoline or diesel, so they are using oil-based energy. And there are obviously different possibilities to switch that toward carbon-free or carbon-neutral fuels. At the same time, on the other hand, we also see a more transformational approach where we could actually see how could we redesign the concepts of mobility in a sense that actually energy consumption might be reduced even further than just switching toward electric vehicles. So we mentioned before that ride hailing, ride sharing might be possibilities. Obviously also the extension of public transportation are possibilities to become more energy efficient in the mobility sector. Nevertheless, we see in Germany in particular, because, well, we are a car country, so to speak, that the vehicles per person are still on the rise. So in fact, even though we are trying to shift more and more of mobility needs toward trains, public transportation, and to incentivize carpooling in different forms, we also see that there are more and more cars on the road. So still, trying to get them electrified is our first best chance to reduce carbon emissions, and at the same time, because electric vehicles are more efficient, to save up on final energy consumption. So you can see here on my slide both the more, let's say, transformational approaches, so changing how we actually consume mobility, and then the technological approaches, where particularly for the passenger vehicle segment, e-mobility will very likely be the largest driver to decarbonize the mobility sector. And this means for the foreseeable future that while final energy consumption and emissions will decrease quite substantially in the transportation sector, the amount of electricity consumed will rise quite a bit. So in Germany, we expect, with the projections that we currently have, that around 100 terawatt hours will be consumed by electric vehicles in the mid of this century, which would be roughly 15% to, or more like toward 20% of the current electricity consumption, a little bit less, obviously, with respect to the future electricity consumption, because other sectors such as heating or industry will just as well be electrified with our target of reducing CO2 emissions. So when we are thinking, well, we are trying to decarbonize the transportation sector, and this will still be by a large degree personal vehicles, and they will again by a large degree be electric. What challenges actually lie ahead in that regard? And we see this as a trilemma, so to speak, where we have to balance the interests alongside different dimensions. So first, we have to see where and how can we actually produce energy. So it was mentioned before, PV and wind are the prime examples of renewable technologies that we can use. And even though we are not as blessed with sun in Germany as you are in India, still at midday, the amount of available renewable energy will probably be substantial in the next couple of years, given the current plans to expand on PV. We have also to look at the grid capacity. So even if energy is abundant potentially at certain times, we have to transport it to the vehicles wherever it's needed. And this comes at a cost if we try to expand the grid in all circumstances and not use the potential of flexibility that might be there in charging vehicles. And lastly, and very importantly, actually, it's the user preferences. So we come from a world where a gasoline or diesel operated vehicle is very, very easy to use. You basically have to refuel quite rarely, and then you are extremely free in how you want to use that vehicle. And we have to shift these preferences to some degree, while at the same time making sure that utility for the end user and the consumer is still there, as to not lose acceptance of that mobility shift that we want to see. And all of this has to happen between different stakeholders. So let's say the original energy economic players, the auto manufacturers, infrastructure operators, and so on and so forth. And it has to happen in time and space, because even with batteries on the rise and other technologies, electricity still by and large is not easily stored as a commodity. So we have a very complex coordination problem alongside different dimensions that we have to solve using, amongst others, new business models and new players in the markets.
Yeah, thank you, Philip, for your view on the situation in Germany. Again, I'd like to invite the audience to ask questions. Feel free to write in the chat whatever you like to know, or raise your hand, and we will give you the opportunity to ask in person. So, to the panelists, when I was in school, learned about business economics, I was taught that any business starts with some sort of value proposition. If there's no value, there would be no business. Value can take on like very different dimensions. So, like in your point of view, like where do you see a value in electric vehicles actually being a component of an energy system?
So maybe if I can briefly start, I think the largest contribution they make is that they are inherently flexible. So in Germany, at least, a car is usually standing still around 23 hours of the day. So it's rarely used for 1 hour, and the rest of the time it's actually standing around somewhere, not necessarily connected to the grid, obviously, but it could be. And within that time frame where it's actually not used, and in the everyday life, the not very strict restrictions on the amount of energy that we use with our vehicles, they can provide a lot of flexibility to the energy system. And that flexibility has inherent value, given that we would need the battery of the electric vehicle anyhow, because that is for its mobility function, but it's still there. So it has not to be procured primarily for the energy system, but can provide value on the side, alongside different dimensions of potential flexibility dispatch. And I think that probably is the biggest value that electric vehicles can have to the power system.
Thank you. Matthias, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. So what Philip is saying here is very, I think it's very relevant, but we also need to sort out that when we talk about some values in relation to different stakeholders, we need to sort out what are the values for the consumer side of having an electrical car. Of course, it's a value if you can charge it overnight with cheap electricity in the parking lot at your own property. I mean, that's a value, and you will have less visits to the service center with your car, and you will be able to still with a system of chargers spread out in the country, you will still be able to use the freedom that comes with having a car. But again, it's still the same kind of platform as the fossil driven engine car. So it's nothing is happening by just shifting to the electrical car. What you have to do is to interconnect the electrical car with the grid and with other electrical cars into some kind of either fleet distribution or taking control over when it's charged or and when it's used for balancing the grid. I mean, then things will happen that might contribute to you as being the car owner, or might contribute to society or the energy companies. So the shift has to happen not only to the electrical vehicle, but also to the electrical vehicle becoming a part of an interconnected system, I think then it's only then we can use the full potential in the different new business models and the different values that can be created along the value chain.
Thank you very much, Robert.
I think, as Mattis rightly pointed out, load shifting is the biggest value that EV can bring in. The situation in India is slightly different because we've got a lot of solar rooftop and that facility, both in terms of offices, a lot of solar rooftop has been installed on government offices, private offices as well. So the opportunity to charge during the daytime is significant in India. That is where EV owners can bring in value, not spending much on fuel, but still getting that facility for mobility. So I think there's a complementary opportunity available in India as well.
And like as I said, I spent here like the last 2 days, and I noticed that the fleet, like the transportation fleet, looks different here in India as compared to Europe, obviously. So do you also see particular like value streams in considering the fact that the electricity fleets differ in the countries India and Germany or Sweden? Yeah, for instance, thinking about e-rickshaws that certainly you won't see in the country where I'm from. Robert, you can like start off if you want. You raised your hand.
Is it addressed to me?
Yeah, if you can, like everyone can feel free to answer.
I think I'll ask Mattis or Phillips could get the question.
The connection was interrupted. I didn't hear your question, but what I could comment on what you said, Rohit, which I think is very interesting. I mean, I just visited India in a couple of weeks ago on a smart city tour when we were trying to build new connections on the research between research organizations in relation to smart cities. And one thing that I noted and that you are emphasizing, Rohit, here is that there are very many possibilities in India, for instance, that we do not have in Europe. That you talked about the possibility of slow charging your car while you are at work, since the sun is most often it's most often shining, right? I mean, this is not an option in Sweden. I do not think it's an option in Germany as either, but in India it is, which makes it very easy to think of a quite rapid development of electrical vehicles in India, while where you can rely on very local installations of chargers, while in Northern Europe we will have to work with the current infrastructure in a totally different way, which means that I think that what we have seen in India now is that there are not that many electric vehicles right now, but I think that the increase in electrical vehicles will soon be much quicker and bigger than what we have seen in Europe, due to that you have this this opportunity. So there is so interesting with different markets when we are comparing some development here.
So there is about 10% growth of EV vehicles every year happening in India. So there is a significant growth potential as on date.
Yeah.
Maybe going to the point of workplace charging, because I think that's actually a very interesting use case still also in Germany. So I think there's some, obviously, again, solar isn't as attractive in Germany as it is in India because we just don't have as many hours of sun, but still it's, when it can be used fairly directly, it's a very cheap source of electricity even in Germany. So workplace charging, particularly given the targets that the national government in Germany has for the PV rollout, I think will have to contribute to a very large degree. And I think currently there is some legislation in place to incentivize employers that they can use the charging electricity as a benefit for their employees, which can obviously incentivize then the employee as to buy an electric vehicle, because it can be just cheaper to be commuting than via an electric vehicle. So I think that's even still in Germany and potentially also in Sweden can be a big lever to actually incentivize and make it fairly cheap for employees to use their vehicles. Although I think we have to discuss this also in light of the switch of workplace culture to some degree. So after the pandemic, or like in the midst of pandemic, more and more people are actually not working fairly constantly at one workplace, but are working remote or at different locations. And that certainly also has an impact on how this can be dealt with and what kind of dimensioning would be thought about. So I think there's like moving target, so to speak, that would have to be hit. And maybe Hannes, going back to your original point of the like different structure of the transportation sectors and modes that are available, I think like on the one hand, the fact that particularly in Germany, and I don't completely know about Sweden, but I would suspect that it's fairly similar. We overall use two big vehicles for the purpose that we are actually using them for. And that also goes for the batteries that are actually built in. So for vehicles that aren't used as much on a general level, batteries are fairly huge, because people are still mostly thinking about having like an all-purpose vehicle, even though the full range is potentially only used once or twice a year. So this obviously increases the flexibility, even though it's not an efficient way to roll out like a transportation system. I think the more various and more using more different modes and using micro mobility services and so on can actually help, on the other hand, to develop a much richer and efficient mobility system at the cost of requiring more coordination and more data stream and integration of these systems with, for instance, public transportation and the apps that we use, for instance. So it's the integration effort, I think, is bigger. But on the flip side, we have a much more efficient overall transportation system if we use those services.
Matthias, please.
Yes, I wanted to some follow up there, because this is, I mean, this is when the magic happens, when we are thinking of mobility as a mobility mix. Then we can find ways of using various lightweight mobility options when we are in the city and when we need to go to the countryside. I mean, that happens for everyone living in Sweden at least once a year, when we go skiing or when we go for our summer vacation. But then we need to have a car that has a range where we can travel for 6 or 8 hours, and we need to, load the family into the car, and we need a lot of stuff. But that happens, I mean, a couple of times a year for most of the people living in a city. So we have, previously we have thought of the car as something that we own and something that I need to own in order to meet the demands that I have in my life. But what we need to do here is to find business models where we can adjust that priorities and make things with make a business model with a high resolution, so that we can fit in things that takes you to your workplace and takes you to your kids' school or whatever during most of the days, and then you can have something that can transport you, I mean, a couple of weeks a year to a more remote location. And in order to do this, I mean, to introduce this kind of mobility mix, there is a lot of integration that needs to be done, both in terms of business, but in terms of data sharing, and in terms of switching between different transportation modes. And today, that's very, I mean, it's very hard to do this, at least in Sweden. And here is where I think most of the magic will have to happen in order to do this switch. And then, of course, the electrical grid and other technology and infrastructure needs to come in place. But the most important and hardest part to do is to do the business some transformation here. Yeah.
Or do you want to add? As I just continue. So like in your discussion, I do see that like when we speak about electric vehicles and business opportunities, we speak about integrated systems, connected systems. You spoke about flexibility as a value. So my question is, how could we actually like coordinate the system and deploy the flexibility that is inherent to electric cars or electric trucks?
I can start. What I see as very important here is to find, I mean, in order to find solutions, we have two options. Either we can centralize things and have some device that is allocating things. That is normally not the way things are happening in in democracies. I mean, normally we are using the market to do this. And in order to use the market, we need to design the market. We need to find a way for buyers and sellers to trade their goods or their services. So we need to find some kind of protocols here where there is an option for me to share my car with Philip or with Rohit, where I can gain something from that, and they can easily be able to use my car, or where there is an option for me to not take the car to my workplace today, since it's needed in order to balance the grid there. But in order to do all those things, we need to develop some protocols where both data is connected, as well as the technical infrastructure is connected, and that those things are also connected to some kind of market or understanding, where people can see where values are and how they can give in to those kind of values, and how they can provide some services in terms of change behavior, for instance, to that market. And I think here is where this is where the really hard things to develop will be, where we had to both come up with some kind of technical protocol here, and we need to connect things, and we need to create that market. So I think this is where a lot of the development will have to happen the coming 10 years.
Yeah, just jump in, Philip.
I totally agree, and I think what sometimes drops off a little bit in the discussion, particularly like also with the slides that I think all have shown when we're looking at the aggregated picture of how many cars we will have or what their energy consumption will be, is that mobility inherently is a very decentralized technology, right? So we have these assets that come into the market, may it be electric vehicles or like smaller electric mobility systems. They are obviously mobile and they are plentiful. So other than we dealt with in the past, we have to connect both in an information stream and in a physical stream more and more technologies, and which are fairly small scale compared to, let's say, a big power plant. So we have to become fairly cheap in connecting and integrating them into the system. Otherwise, the overhead and transaction costs will eat up all benefits that we could potentially reap. And we have to have the ability to deal with all these data streams and all the information incoming basically in real time, and the amount of data that we have to handle and the market protocols potentially have to deal with a lot more than they used to have in the past. And they are also like businesses that can actually deal with the data and aggregate it in a meaningful way and still reap the benefits and the value. They will become, in my opinion, more and more important.
Yeah, Robert.
If we see it from the Indian perspective, I think there are a lot more opportunities. We see a complete spectrum of things. At the local level, we have solutions like e-rickshaws, and which have penetrated in a very big way. People have invested in e-rickshaws, which transport people from one locality to another locality within the city. So that offers a very cheap solution, because charging in itself is a very economical solution. And though the speed is a challenge, but still people are adopting it in urban areas, especially in congested areas. They are significantly adopting it. So bringing in that investment to provide local transport solutions, that is one segment. Another segment that we see where the growth is happening is that on the taxi services, the ride-hailing services, which because of some policy interventions, they are bringing in more and more e-vehicles into their fleet. So there the transition is happening because of the policy interventions. Apart from that, at the larger scale, moving from one intercity transportation, we see a large segment of investment happening on the trains, where electric transportation in trains is happening in a very big way. So definitely, when we want to develop these business models, somewhere the investment has to come in, whether it is coming through private entrepreneurs or through policy initiatives, or through investment coming from the government. So either way, some mechanism on or some business model on that segment has to be developed.
And I just want to add that when the internet came, as in the TCP/IP, some protocol were some both developed and adopted to computer networks. I mean, when that happened, computers had been connected beforehand. We had connections between computers. Computers were acting server's client, but they were not interconnected to this net where every machine could be connected. So by introducing the TCP/IP and later on the World Wide Web as a way of searching files on different servers, we were making it dead easy for the hardware manufacturers to connect their computer to the same net and transfer some information. And when that happened, that was the starting point for the explosion. Of the transformation of sharing data all over the world. So we have to find that kind of moment, that kind of technology in some way here as well, in order to make sure that this happens. And what I see from some projects today, and both companies and some research projects, I see very many some isolated ways of sharing information between different devices and the grid and the cars. But what we need to do is to realize that things will start to happen when we can find a way to connect everything. Then it's also where people will start to build like business models for this. So I think that is very important that we develop and take that step.
We see a question in the chat, and again, I'd like to invite the audience. Feel free to ask any questions you'd like to address. Mr. Kumar, I think if you want, we can just let you jump in, and then you can ask if it works. Else, I would provide the panelists with a question. Maybe I just start with the first one. So Mr. Kumar asked, how are sustainable development goals and electric vehicles connected with the social technical transition in India, according to Giels? Yeah.
I think yes, sustainability, when we look at the urban sector, definitely significant environmental pollution happening due to the other vehicles, the fossil fuel vehicles. That is creating a lot of pollution. And again, the quality of living in the congested areas, that is getting deteriorated over a period of time. So if you want to target sustainable development, definitely urban mobility has to go more greener. and electric vehicles have a very significant role to play in that. If we are able to transfer the population on electric vehicles, electric mobility solutions are provided end to end, both at the local, intercity, as well as intracity solutions. Definitely, the cost is going to decrease because the marginal cost of utilizing those vehicles is significantly low if we are able to align it with our solar generation that is available. So it does create a lot of opportunities in that segment.
And can I add there, Rohit? I mean, and when you take the next step, meaning that we are constructing some kind of fleet, we haven't started talk about self-driving cars yet, but I mean that is the next step, and then there will be market incentives for the fleet owners to optimize the system so that we can also decrease the time that we are spending in the car and decrease the number of cars. So that is, but in order to come there, we need to take the technological step towards electrical vehicles, because then we can start talk about self-driving cars as well. And that's, I mean, that's when the next big step will happen in terms of meeting the sustainable development goals.
Agreed.
There's another question from Mr. Kumar. He asked, what are some innovative business models for electric vehicles and how can they effectively connect with both the public and private sector?
There were two questions in one there.
Yeah.
What I mean, when we try to foresee what is happening, I mean, one could easily imagine some kind of transportation or mobility membership where you buy this card that can work in the on the buses, on the trains in a city, but also can take you the last mile where the bus is not designed to go with a self-driving some electrical vehicle. So in that sense, we could use self-driving cars and a fleet of self-driving cars as providing the last mile for the mobility need. And in that sense, it will be it's quite interesting business for the ones who is owning the fleet of self-driving cars. It will also be a value for the person that do not need to buy his or her own car, because they know that someone is taking care of that last mile that is not taken care of by the bus routes or by the trains. So I think there is I mean, this is a business opportunity that will happen when the self-driving car fleets are real.
Maybe a more maybe a somewhat less innovative model, because it happens still or already today to some degree, is the ability to, well, aggregate the charging of electric vehicles and then participate in different electricity markets to provide cheaper tariffs for charging than the regular household tariff in retail electricity markets. So the integration on the one hand, like the private perspective would be that we are able to offer cheaper electricity for charging if we have some control over how and when the charging takes place. And then the connection to the public sector is depending on whether the electricity system as such is public or private. Obviously, that's a question of the respective market, would be to define different value streams that can arise from this use of the scheduling. So this can obviously be the wholesale electricity markets, but it can also be providing services to local congestion management for distribution system operators. So their business operators have to come into a dialogue what the most urgent and most pressuring problems are locally, to see where actually value can be extracted best.
Yeah, and imagine a city where we have self-driving cars that acts as a battery storing energy that has costed differently depending on when they were charged. So when you're using solar panels in your house and you're using that for the electric need that you have in your house, and then the sun goes away, it becomes cloudy, then a car could be moved from somewhere to your house and connected to your house, and then acting as a battery where you are buying the energy from that battery for quite small amount, instead of using the grid for the energy that you need. So in that sense, we have created energy that has some kind of mobility in itself, and that has costed differently when it was charged, and of course that will be priced differently when they are bought. So that's but now we're talking. I mean, now we are 10 years from now, at least. But there are so many options here when we introduce self-driving cars, because then the batteries in the electric vehicles can be used without someone having to be transported in that car.
Yeah, I think you raise a very, very interesting point, and at the end, it narrows down to arbitrage, right? So, like traditionally, storages do earn money with arbitrage business, but arbitrage between different time steps, and bringing a regional component into arbitrage businesses, right? Like buying electricity at one location at a certain price and bringing that energy to a different location where electricity is traded for a different price, right? I think this is like a really new aspect, I would say. Robert, did you want to add something, or?
Yeah, I think the role, the additional benefit that we can expect in urban planning as well, apart from the benefit as pointed out by Phillips in terms of managing the grid congestion, managing traffic is also a value that urban planners can bring in by optimally locating those charging stations at locations where they can reduce the urban congestion on the roads. That is something beyond the electrical perspective, but definitely from urban mobility perspective that gives value to the for sustainable development as well.
Let me ask you another question from the audience. Mr. Ahusha asked, what policy and technology innovation is required for integrating battery swap and battery charging infrastructure for e-mobility?
Please.
Okay. Just like in terms of policy, I think we see a very traditional like chicken and egg problem, particularly in the large scale public charging infrastructure, where chargers today are, at least at some points, are not really profitable because there are not enough electric vehicles yet. But electric vehicles won't come to the markets if people are too afraid that there isn't sufficient charging infrastructure. So I think we've seen in most major markets that there is some form of policy intervention to ensure a rollout of charging infrastructure, and whether that is via public tenders or other like auction-like mechanism, or really just traditional like subsidies. I think it's a design question that is very particular to a respective market, but that some policy intervention at the early stages is needed, I think, has been fairly evident to just roll that out. In terms of technology innovation, and particularly also the comment on the battery swap technology, maybe just like a word of caution. And I think, because I think Matthias also alluded to this before, that for this transition to work properly, we need reliable standards. And the charging infrastructure that now is used worldwide uses certain standards. And even though innovation might give us some options that would be better, at some point, certain paths have to be taken in order to ensure that this rollout really happens. That doesn't mean, obviously, that maybe higher voltages of batteries can't be better or provide a better charging experience. But we shouldn't always, I think, be expecting the next big big thing to be around the corner to some degree, but also at some point commit to certain standards to ensure that this transition can actually take place.
And the battery swap, the battery swap option is a good option if you have a low capacity grid. But if you do have a high capacity grid, and we have chargers that can charge a car, I mean, up to 70 or 80% within like 20 or 25 minutes, then the battery swap option becomes some less interesting. And as Philip as I mentioned, it comes with very high requirements on standardizations in order to reach that certain volume that is needed in order to invest in it for someone. So I think that is, I mean, I would also hesitate a bit about the battery swap as the future option. But what is important when it comes to making the switch to electrical vehicles is to lower the risk for the consumer. So when electrical vehicles were introduced, there were no chargers. An electrical car costed like $100,000. It could go for like 200 some kilometers at most. So it was a lot of risk in this business, and no one knowed how long the battery would last in terms of being able to be charged and recharged. So what is happening now is that we see a lot of financing solutions where you can take part in owning your car with a very small amount of money per month, or you can take part in a fleet of cars. And I think this is reducing the risk for the consumer, and that will really help people to adopt to electrical vehicles. So if I were about to help politicians to make this happen ASAP, I would like to introduce the discussion to them where they can look into how to make sure that the risk for the consumer is as low as possible, because that is where we have to work in order to make the acceptance higher for this kind of cars.
Agreed with Phillips. I think policy interventions have to be done at multiple scale for the consumers, for those who are putting in the EV charging stations, the urban mobility providers like the taxi services. Some sort of policy intervention has to be provided, whether it is in terms of land at a reasonable rate for those who are putting in the charging stations, and so on. Maybe some tax incentives for those who are buying electric vehicles. So I think a wide variety of those would be required to bring in all people on board.
May I bring up? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, it's a mix of intervention we need to do in order to make this happen, and that is also what we have seen in countries where this has been very successful, Iceland, Norway, for instance. And what we also can see is happening now in those countries as well as in Sweden is that the incentives from the government, they are removed, but people are still buying electrical vehicles because they believe in the product as well as their way of looking at economy when having and driving a car has changed. So what you're talking about, Roy, I think is very important to make that happen, but it's also important to see that is only temporarily. But another thing that I wanted to bring up here is what happens when we are, the freedom that Philip started to talk about, the freedom of having a car. This was how we talked about a car in the 1960s and 70s. This was the freedom machine, right? What has happened now is that we are switching from you being able to buy a car and you being able to fill it with gasoline. That's the only two things that was needed in order. And you, of course, you had to be able to drive the car. But if you have those three things, you could use the car, right? But what is happening now is that we are talking about business models, we are talking about fleets, we are talking about interconnections, we are talking about things that requires some kind of citizenship or membership in those systems. So That will create a lot of good things. For instance, if we have self-driving cars, kids could go with the car themselves. The adult do not need to drive the car for the kid, but the kid could just jump in the car. I mean, that's good. That we will reduce time in cars for people. But what also will happen is that it will be hard for people that are not part of the society in terms of not having the credit card or not being able to take part in this kind of markets. And those people were part of the previous ways of owning a car. They could own a car and they could drive a car. But today we are locking those kind of people out from systems if we are requiring them to be part of the membership thing. So we have to really, think about how we would like to design the society there so that all people are included in the new solutions, independently of what kind of wealth or salary or work or whatever we are coming from.
Maybe in that regard, very quickly, a case study from Germany, because that has been discussed quite a bit. That Germany now is like tendering off lots of high performance charging stations to really get this long distance travel with electric vehicles going. And it has been a very large debate how payment options should be mandated at these charging stations. And it now ended up that ad hoc payments for certain rates have to be available. Still, you would need a credit card or something similar. You cannot buy with cash anymore. But I think at least what originally was intended by the station operators, that you would necessarily need a certain app, a certain membership in that program, has been avoided at that point, particularly to ensure that the participation options are more diverse and you are at least able with a credit card to always procure electricity, even if that might not be that won't be the cheapest option in the future, that's foreseeable, but a certain mode of participation is still ensured by that policy intervention, which, particularly if these stations are funded with public money, I think is a very important dimension to think about.
Yeah, these points refer to participation, right? And participation is obviously, like in transitions, in infrastructure projects, a big issue in European countries. Let me bring up another question from the audience that goes into that direction, but directly refers to India. Dr. Kumar asked, like, it's basically two questions. First, he asked, what is the current state of research and development by the government of India regarding electric vehicles, and what is their plan to transition all vehicles to EVs by 2030? And furthermore, he asked, and here, like, the participative aspect comes into play. He asked, considering that EVs are typically more expensive, how does the government of India and EV companies plan to make them accessible to the common people of India?
It seems like there's a lot of interest on the Indian side on EV. Yes, there's a big transition happening, though the share of EVs is still small, as is there in other countries as well. As far as R&D is concerned, some of the big players like Mahindra, they have put in large EV plants, and others are also following up. Though the challenges, one of the big challenges that we see is batteries heating up. Some of the two-wheelers, the standards are not up to the mark, and incidents do raise a concern on security. But definitely all large major players, they are getting some or the other incentive from the government to put up those EV plants, EV manufacturing plants. And there is a significant growth happening both on two-wheeler segment, though the standards are not so strong. And in the case of four-wheelers also, over the last 3-4 years, the prices have gone down because of the economy of scale. But yet there is a significant scope to bring it at par with the other gasoline-based vehicles. Transition, looking at the second question, plan to transition all EVs by 2030. I think that would be too big a target as of now. But definitely new vehicles, that there would be a marginally increasing penetration of EVs over a period of time. Getting it 100% would be quite challenging. I think the scale is too large as of now. It would require significant initiatives from the government, otherwise it may be difficult. To make them cost effective, definitely some sort of tax incentives has to be done. Otherwise, bringing it at par. One other thing, a major thing that they can do is, as indicated, offering better tariffs, cheaper tariffs for electric vehicles. That could incentivize people to bring them on board to buy those vehicles, basically making the first investment and then utilizing those over a period of time. I think those could be some quick answers to the questions that have been raised.
Yeah, there's one last question from the audience, and then I wanted to ask you a final question, to the panel. Dr. Kulkarni asked, and this question relates more to the life cycle of a battery. So, is there any concepts for sustainable waste disposal mechanisms coming out of EVs? That can be battery, I guess, could be also the car as a whole. Waste disposal. So
I mean, I think easiest option obviously is Second Life for now for the battery speaking. I think like the rest of the vehicle is not too big a change compared to current ICE vehicles. So I'm not an expert on that, but I wouldn't expect that it's too different. And in terms of the battery, I think, yeah, the easiest would be that even with a decreased capacity, it still can be used in stationary applications. And for the time being, there is a large demand in such applications in the power sector and also in data centers, for instance. So there is, I think, a demand for these then cheaper Second Life batteries. Obviously, that's not a perfectly sustainable solution yet because it's just like a prolongation of the life cycle. But from what I know is that the technological advances in recycling lithium-ion batteries are also moving forward quite a bit, and the chemical composition of the batteries is also improving in a direction where it gets easier to recycle them. So I wouldn't say that we are perfect yet, and we would be able to really embed this into a circular economy, but we are certainly moving in that direction, and there, I think, are very promising steps toward true recycling of batteries.
And I mean, what happens when we talk about some electrical vehicles is that we are talking about things that are quite expensive. So we could, of course, recycle the battery in our cell phones, but people do not do that because it's too small of a value. But when we talk about the batteries and the metals that are in the batteries in the electrical vehicles, we talk about things that are both quite expensive and also quite hard to find. And what is happening both in North America and Europe right now is that there's a lot of venture capitalists, automakers, and energy companies. They are pouring money into dozens of startups recycling batteries from cars. So things are actually happening here, and I think that the price of the car, the electrical vehicle itself, is helping here because there is no, I mean, there is a financial soundness in taking your old battery to some kind of station where it can be recycled. So I think that is a business that will be much more mature the coming 2 to 5 years.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left. I'd like to ask you for final statements. You're researchers, you're dedicated to your jobs, motivated and bringing your countries forward. So, like in your research discipline, how do you contribute to bringing business models or EV integration forward? Who wants to start?
How are we contributing? Are we contributing?
Mm.
I think that the best contribution a researcher can do is to do things like this, and to go to company events, talk to policymakers. I mean, talk about what we know from research is changing things, because that is informing people's minds. And then of course we have the innovative side of what we are doing as a researcher, where we are thinking together with other minds alike all over the world, in creating and proposing new ideas that hopefully someone who is ready to start a company can find financing to do. I think that are the major parts where we as researchers can contribute to this development that we are talking about right now.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and from like your specific research discipline, I mean, you're coming from a field of computer science and business economy.
Yeah, and what I'm doing here and what we are doing in terms of the digital transformation research is that we are trying to show how data can support this kind of development. How is computer science an active engine in a business model where the technology that is developed can meet the market? So I think that is what we're doing on an operational basis.
Thank you. Philip, I think you wanted to start already.
Yeah, it was more like on the general level that Matthias alluded to first. I would say that like the first responsibility, obviously, of a researcher would be like the pursuit of knowledge, and knowledge can help to reduce risk when it comes to the future. So just by the fact that we understand problems better, we can make it easier for policymakers, private households, and companies to actually make decisions. And I wouldn't see like my responsibility to see what like a good business model or a bad business model is. That's for entrepreneurs to decide. But I think just like the increasing the body of knowledge could help. And maybe from the field of economics where I'm from, I think the first and foremost task is to make sure that markets work in a way that we want them to work, in that they allow for an efficient allocation of resources and actually enable businesses to reap the benefits of the value they provide to society. And then from that, innovation can actually follow.
Rohit, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, I think following up with what both Matthias and Phillips are indicating too, our research primarily should be able to demonstrate that the decisions that the policymakers are doing, they are informed decisions. So as researchers, we should be able to demonstrate solutions, business models, solutions like possibly sharing models, some business models which can indicate to the policymakers what incentives have to be taken, or maybe to the technocrats on what type of technology they should target towards, and sort of things, informing them in taking the right decisions towards the growth of this sector. That is where our role as researchers would be beneficial for them.
Thank you. I think we're right in time. I want to thank you three panelists for the interesting discussions, for bringing your insights into this panel here. I think it like really shows that EV integration and business models can be seen from various different perspectives, and there's that various different research avenues also connected with it that we as researchers could tackle. So thanks very much. Adishri, do you want to say some final words?
My final words would also be thank you for such a wonderful discussion. Thanks, Rohit, thanks, Philip, thanks, Matthias, and mostly thanks, Hannes, for all the questions and planning this panel. It was a very interactive discussion, and I also enjoyed and learned a lot in the background. I was listening carefully, and thank you also to the participants who were here, and thanks a lot for the questions. I would leave it with a short note that we would have a short break again as we move to the next panel. We have two more panels. This is parallel panels, two more sessions to go on adaptation and diffusion of technologies and AI for integrated mobility and energy systems. So hope you can join still for the next sessions as well. Those will be the closing sessions for the day. So once again, thanks very much for taking your time out in preparation for this panel. I would say goodbye here and good day or good evening to all of you here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Yeah.